Perfect. I think we can begin. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amanda Duchaz, and I am the Learning Coordinator at Twende Mbele. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, Rapid Evaluation to Improve Government Decision-Making Lessons from South Africa and Uganda. For those of you who may be new to Twende Mbele, we are an African peer learning partnership that brings together governments and institutions working to strengthen monitoring and evaluation systems, evidence use, and learning across the continent. Through peer exchange and practical collaboration, we support governments in making better use of evidence for improved public sector performance and service delivery. So today's webinar focuses on a topic that is becoming increasingly important across African governments, which is how to generate credible evidence quickly enough to inform decision-making when policy and implementation challenges cannot wait for lengthy evaluation processes. So we are delighted to be joined by colleagues from South Africa and Uganda, two of our partner countries, who will share practical experiences of using rapid evaluations within government systems to strengthen evidence-informed decision-making. So I will be introducing each speaker in more detail immediately before their presentations. Just before we begin, a few housekeeping points. As my colleague Parfait mentioned, we do have English and French interpretation available, so please select your preferred language channel. And also the session is being recorded, and the recordings will be made available afterwards through the Twende Mbele YouTube channel and other learning platforms, our websites, our LinkedIn. During the presentations, please feel free to type your questions in the chat and who your question is directed at. So please indicate if it's for Sarah or Roland or both speakers. And then we will collect questions throughout the session and address as many as possible during the discussion period. So just a little bit more about the session. So across African governments, the demand for timely and actionable evidence is growing. Yet the traditional evaluation approaches often struggle to respond to urgent policy and implementation needs within government decision-making timelines. So within the Twende Mbele partnership, rapid evaluation has emerged as a practical government-led approach to generating credible findings within compressed timeframes to support policy adjustment, implementation improvement, and more responsive governance. So throughout both the presentations today and our discussions, we will explore three key questions. The first is why governments are increasingly turning to rapid evaluations, how rapid evaluations can be operationalized within the existing public sector systems, and finally, what institutional conditions enable the use and uptake of rapid evaluation findings. So first, we will begin the session with a presentation from our colleague from South Africa, followed by Uganda, and then we will move into the discussion with our participants. So our first speaker is Sarah Tobo from the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation in South Africa. Sarah is a highly experienced research monitoring and evaluation professional with more than 15 years of experience in the field. She currently serves as Deputy Director for Frontline Monitoring Support at the DPME and has played a significant role in strengthening South Africa's national evaluation system, particularly through leading work on capacity development. Among her many contributions, she has been involved in the review of South Africa's evaluation policy framework and the development and review of evaluation training programs that support evaluation capacity across government. So Sarah holds a master's degree in development studies, a postgraduate diploma in monitoring and evaluation, and is currently pursuing a PhD at the University of Witwatersrand. Beyond government, she has made important contributions to the evaluation profession through the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association, where she has served in various capacities and currently sits on the board with responsibility for capacity development and professionalization. Sarah, we are delighted to have you with us today and look forward to hearing from South Africa's experience. The floor is yours.
No, thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you for the introduction. And I also want to appreciate the opportunity to share some of our work that we are doing in terms of a rapid evaluation. So one advantage that I have, I'm not sure if my screen is it clear yet?
Yes, it is clear. We can see.
It's clear. Awesome. So one of the advantages that I have is that I've served in the evaluation unit of the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation. And some of you might know that the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation is a custodian of issues of planning and coordinating the planning and monitoring the evaluation of the whole of government. So I've had the privilege of being in the evaluation unit, and now I'm in the monitoring, and I'm using both skills and also utilize based on the fact that I know most people also the skills that are in DPME, I'm able to organize skills and get work to be done. So I want to really share on the experience of the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation in terms of rapid evaluations. I'll share two case studies, the two case studies that I've led in in terms of the rapid evaluations. So my outline my presentation outline is as above, like I'll provide an introduction, the purpose, the background, and also try and answer why governments are turning to rapid evaluations and how evaluations can be operationalized within public sector systems and lessons for strengthening evidence informed policy making. Maybe just also to give a background on the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation. Like I said, it coordinates long-term planning in terms of the national development planning, like charting the country's developmental trajectory. And also it coordinates the planning among us, all the levels of government, so that there's issues of coherence and also alignment and in terms of our work. And then there's a component that looks into monitoring, just to also provide real-time data in terms of how far as to the progress towards the National Development Plan, which is further which is also further supported by what we call a medium-term development plan. That is, after every 5 years, we develop a medium-term development plan that eventually supports the National Development Plan. So there are systems that DPM has invested in a number of monitoring mechanisms in terms of providing timely data. At any given time, you are able to ask us as to how far are we through the monitoring mechanisms that DPM has instituted. And also there's an evaluation unit where we evaluate critical government programs that also support the NDP, so that we inform in terms of issues of budget prioritization. We're able to really provide a judgment as to what works and what doesn't work, because we are living in times where austerity measures have been applied. So we need to ensure that resources are used optimally. So there's also another component on interventions. DPME coordinates interventions, and you'll note that the case studies that I'm going to present, they are on interventions where we coordinate. I think we're living in times where there are floods, there are things that we never thought, climate change has become the elephant in the room. And so the Department of Planning Monitoring coordinates such responses. So you'll note that the two case studies that I'll present, they are on that, because with floods, there's urgency for results. There's urgency for results as to what works and what doesn't work. So because with issues of floods, you need to respond quickly, and we need to respond with evidence to show that this works or this doesn't work. So the principle of policy framework. So in South Africa, the issues of monitoring and evaluation, really they are supported by what we call a government-wide monitoring and evaluation system, which has got its principles. Evaluation should be development-oriented and should address key development priorities of government and its citizen. And evaluation should be undertaken ethically and also with integrity. And it should be also utilization oriented, and a sound evaluation method should also be utilized. Evaluation should advance government's transparency and accountability, and that evaluation must be taken in a way which is inclusive and also participatory. And it should also promote learning. So our government-wide monitoring and evaluation system provides such principles. And you note that even our national evaluation system and some of the policies in MNE, they are literally aligning to those principles of the overarching government-wide monitoring and evaluation systems. And if you note that also we just revised the national evaluation policy framework 2025, and for some they know that the national evaluation system was introduced in South Africa in 2011, and we have had a national evaluation policy framework then, and it has been revised 2019, and now we are. And the system itself has also gone through evaluation, because we believe in evidence, and we need to check and establish what works with the system and what does not work. And if you check the National Evaluation Policy Framework, it promotes broader and more flexible evaluative approaches. And one key thing that is coming, and rapid evaluations is part of those that are part of the approaches that are being promoted by the National Evaluation Policy Framework, after realization that evaluations were taking time, there was urgency of results, and evaluations were taking more time. So one of the things that the National Evaluation Policy Framework is bringing in is that rapid evaluations need to be done. And also want to also appreciate that Twende Mbele came through and also assisted DPME in terms of developing a rapid evaluation guideline, so that if you're at any corner in the province, you're able to conduct those evaluations. It really provides a step-by-step guide on how to do those rapid evaluations. So in terms of the experience that I'm going to share, like I said, there are two case studies that I'm going to flag here, and the two rapid evaluations that I've led. The first one I led in 2024, and the other one in 2025. So I had to utilize internal skills, because one of the things that is taking long in evaluation, especially in the traditional, but is issues of procurement. Procurement can take more time. So when you're using internal skills, you are simply mobilizing within DPME. There's an evaluation unit that has got skills, and there's that data units that people can analyze. There are also teams that can go on the ground. So I had to utilize internal skills. So I had to cut time, because most of the time, so I had to do it in 3 months, because there was agents of results. And you'll notice, as to the changes that as I begin to go down into those case studies, you'll see the changes that have happened. So another thing that there's no budget, and things have to be done. We have to use our current operational budget just to produce results. And you'll notice, even in the case studies as I present, how those eventually facilitated learning. Because if we don't have money, and doesn't mean we don't need evaluation, we still need. So I'm going to share on two case studies. The one is on early weather warning system. I'm sure most of you know early weather warning system. It gets to let people know how the weather will unfold and its impact thereof. Because the early weather warning, the way it's run by the South African Weather Services, is such that when people get to know that this is how weather will unfold and this is how weather will, people will take heed of the message, such that the impact of the weather will be minimized. And then the other case study that I'm going to share on is the Welisizwe rural bridges. So in terms of how when the streams of water are full, it means kids are not going to school. This is how things have been happening. So the government had to introduce a program called the Welisizwe rural bridges. So this one is an internally sourced building, where we utilize the skills from the South African Defence Forces to construct those bridges. such that even when the streams are full, children can still proceed to school. People can still access their medication and go to the clinics in spite of the streams being full. So these are the case studies. And if you note, these are interventions that literally respond to the times that we are living in. So I want to give a bit of background on the early weather warnings. Like I said, the South African Weather Service has created an impact-based early warning system to alert the public about the weather and how it will unfold. So it aims to improve weather awareness in order to avert the loss of lives and economic impact of natural disaster. So although studies have been conducted to assess the implementation of this, the uptake of the system by the public has not been explored, because what has been seen is that these early warnings are always issued, but still the impact remains high. So we needed an evaluation just to establish as to where are we getting it wrong. So severe weather events such as strong winds and flooding can still cause fatality, in spite of the South African Weather Service having issued the early warning systems. So the rapid evaluation had to focus on KwaZulu-Natal and also in the Eastern Cape, because most of the time the impact of the floods is felt most there. So in terms of the Wellisizwe rural bridges, it is a most significant government infrastructure initiative that addresses issues of connectivity in the rural areas in a cost-effective manner. So it was launched as a government infrastructure development program where modular bailer pedestrian and vehicular bridges get to be constructed, because once they are full and the streams are full and rivers, connectivity gets to be cut. So it ensures that people continue to connect to schools, to health services, to businesses, and in the midst of the weather conditions that they are receiving. So the problem statement, like I said, with the early weather warnings issued, but still there are problems. People still die from weather. So we wanted to really establish, are really people, are the communities really receiving this? Probably you send out the message and the people that you're targeting, they don't even receive it. We really needed to establish as to what was the problem. So our evaluation focus in terms of the early warning system, it really had to focus on the citizens themselves to really establish as to whether they were receiving these early warnings, and also to even check the issues of coordinating stakeholders, how they work, where the bottlenecks, and the aim being the fact to improve the system, because evidence has shown even worldwide that once early warning systems have been issued, they are able to avert fatalities. And you'll note that the United Nations has also issued an early warnings for all, given the climate change environment that we're operating in. So with the Wellisizwe bridges, like I said, it's an in-sourced program. We're not using service providers. It's the Department of Defense. There are about 5 government departments that are working together in terms of building those bridges. But the pace as well, 40 bridges have been completed by 2029. The progress was quite slow, and the program also had challenges. And government was spending a lot on this, and we needed to really institute an evaluation, a rapid evaluation, to really establish as to where are we getting it wrong, because the demand for bridges, especially in the times that we are living in, is very high. So the methodology that was used in the early warnings for SAR, we had to use document review. We also had to do literature reviews. We had to do interviews with disaster centers, because what we are told is that South African Weather Service issues the early warnings to the disaster management centers for them to distribute, and also to distribute to communities. So we wanted to really establish that if disaster management centers are given the message, do they disseminate? Because South African Weather Service can tick a box and say we have disseminated, but has it really reached the intended recipients? So we had to do about 205 interviews with households in Port St. John's and also in KwaZulu-Natal. And then also I had to interview some organized groups like business, NGO, just to really understand how can we really strengthen the program. In terms of the early warnings was done in 2024 in October, and the early season of bridges was done in October also. All of them were done in a period of 3 months. So in early season rural bridges, we had to also do document review in terms of the progress reports and see. And also we had to do a literature review with countries that are ahead, especially because the issues of floods, they are still relatively new in countries like South Africa, but there are some countries that have always had disasters. So we also had to check as to how they were managing infrastructure programs that are responding to issues of bad weather. So we had to also do interviews with 5 implementing departments: the Department of Public Works, the Department of Defense, Transport, and the Department of Corporate Governance. And we also had to do focus group discussions at site with provisional implementers. And also we had to establish, we also had to include service users, that's to establish if indeed they were involved in the construction of the bridges from planning, and also were they involved in determining where the bridge was, is it being useful, have they seen an impact based on the bridge, are there kids not missing school, some bridge has been constructed, or all those things. So we had to go to, because the program is in 6 provinces, we had to go down on the ground to the 6, and we had structures, questionnaires for our interview, for our service users, which are the communities. We also had a focus group guide for all our stakeholders that I've listed there. So in terms of organization of skills, like I said, one thing that we've seen with evaluations, one thing that takes time is procurement. So in DPME, I was the program manager of all the two rapid evaluations. So in DPME, there's an evaluations unit. So we had to delegate them to construct a theory of change for each of them, a theory of change for each of the programs. And then there's a unit called research, and we assign them with literature. So things were going concurrently, like a literature review, and they were also responsible for analysis of qualitative data. There's a data unit within DPME. It was the one that was responsible for analysis of quantitative data. Then the frontline unit within DPME was responsible for project management, also development of tools. And this is the team that also went down to the ground. We had to assign teams to go on the ground and also collect data. So we had to utilize the skills that are there within DPME. So in terms of the findings from the early weather warnings systems, we because at times the way South African Weather Service issues they issue technical jargon. So ideally, the way the program was envisaged, it was such that the disaster management units in the district or in the municipal level, they're supposed to conduct awareness and let communities know what are these early warnings, such that by the time communities receive them on the phone or on radio, they have an understanding. But one gap that we picked is that public awareness campaigns were not happening because our disaster management units are already busy with disaster after disaster that are happening in our communities. So there was a gap, such that even if I receive it on the phone, I don't understand what it is, So these are the things that we picked on the ground, that our disaster management units are quite overwhelmed. They are the ones with that responsibility. Probably we should think about involving other community groupings like our churches, and also, or even our community health workers, other groupings, because our disaster management units, they're already overwhelmed. We also discovered that vulnerable groups are excluded. There is no message for the deaf. There is no, all those things. So the vulnerable groups were excluded. In Eastern Cape, we also had to get to understand from communities that, because according to South African Weather Service, we were made to understand that it is the only authoritative source in terms of weather information. Communities were telling us that we can tell from the behavior of animals how weather. So how then, it means South African Weather Service has to work with indigenous communities in terms of, because if communities don't regard South African Weather Service, then there's a problem. They are standing there saying that the only authoritative source, yet communities are saying, hi, Tina, we've got our own ways of knowing. So we also discovered that at times, early warnings are taken through TV. Not everyone has got TV. There are data issues. They're sent through. Not everyone has got that. How do we utilize different mechanisms to ensure that eventually people receive those messages. It's in one of the interviews with communities, they at some point they said South African Weather Service gave an alarm 5 and the weather didn't turn that way. So issues of trust, people begin to say, they always tell us these things and it doesn't happen. People continue with their day-to-day work. So it's all those things. And we also discovered that even amongst the implementing organizations, there was kind of fragmentation, lack of integrated coordination, and at times we even found that even communities were kind of aggrieved because government had not even fulfilled some of their promises from the previous disasters. They promised businesses that given that your business was destroyed by the previous disaster and government did not meet those needs. So you would find that communities were aggrieved. So these were some of the unintended consequences of this research, in as much as we've structured questions, but you would find communities bringing those issues because they were not happy with government on a number of issues. So there was inconsistency in disaster relief provision, and there were delays in registration of local organization. It is all those things that we found. So really, we categorized the challenges according to communication and public understanding, barriers to effective implementation, which I've highlighted, and accuracy and timeliness of focus. Because at times when the focus get to be delayed to be issued, people tend to continue with their day-to-day work without even regarding them. So in some cases, if I'm supposed to collect a child from school, in as much as I'm told I'm not supposed to, people continue with their day-to-day issues, and then they found their car swept away in the process. So in terms of the Wellisizwe Bridge, the bridge, I'm almost done, Chair. In terms of the Wellisizwe, the infrastructure one. So what we discovered is that there was compromised community engagement in terms of location and employment of expanded public works, because the program, the way it has been designed, so the Department of Defense is supposed to pitch up a tent for some weeks and construct a bridge, and municipalities are supposed to provide water to those defense people, and they are supposed to provide water and other amenities like toilets and all those. So what we discovered that in terms of the stakeholders themselves, it looked like there were no clear roles and responsibilities. You'll find that some delays were caused by municipalities who would have stepped up in terms of providing the Department of Defense, the soldiers, with this. So communities would get employment. Maybe in a bridge they will employ about 20 people so that they assist with some minor work. So we also find disputes in some communities where some communities felt like, no, the councillor brought his people, we don't know. So, and then the other thing that we discovered, there were delays in procurement and challenges associated with local economic development, because the way the program was envisaged is that in terms of supply of materials, it's supposed to promote the economy of that area in terms of supply of some bricks and what, but you realize that some of these companies, they couldn't step up to the challenge. There was too much subcontracting, subcontracting, and then materials get to be delayed, to be delivered late. So while a need for localization beneficiaries, this project has also highlighted the increases and complexity in terms of issues of localization, local economic development. So, and also one thing that we picked is that in some provinces where the office of the premier would coordinate all these stakeholders, you would find that even the progress in terms of the bridges would be better. And also one thing that we also picked is that there seem to be coordination mechanisms at each level, at national level, at provincial level, and also at local, that are supposed to sit and establish progress. Those mechanisms were not sitting, they were not sitting, and hence the project, there was so much money, the government spends a lot of money on this project, but some of these delays were causing government to spend a lot. So the other thing that we also discovered is that even the disaster management units were not part of this yet. This program is in response to disasters. So it was such a concern, and the issues of the funding model. It must reflect project complexity, because the way the expectation is that it's budgeted at the province, and then provincial transport needs to release money to national transport. So all those budgeting dynamics and complexities were causing delays in terms of the delivery of the project itself. And at times you find even in some provinces there was no yellow plant, which was eventually delaying the project, because what defense would just supply the engineers, but in terms of the resources, the provincial transport was supposed to provide the yellow plant. So the roles and responsibilities were not clear. So this is my last slide, Chair, in terms of after this the rapid evaluation, what is going on? So there's an overhaul of the whole disaster management system that is currently underway in South Africa. And then there's also a co-design workshop that has been scheduled for the 28th of July to revamp the impact-based severe weather warning. So what we did as the Department of Planning, we had to present these findings to all the relevant stakeholders, and we had to propose an improvement plan in terms of where are the gaps in the program. So we are quite grateful that South African Weather Service is already trying to change how the early warnings are working. So I've also been invited to that workshop, on the co-design workshop, for the 28th of July, and it's bringing in all the key stakeholders that are involved in the early weather warning science. So we are also tracking improvements, and there's been such an interest even from our parliament in terms of tracking how the improvements are being taken on board. And from time to time, I have to write to Parliament explaining that this is what is going to happen. And one thing that I've seen with Parliament, if they gave you a question in October last year, they will even follow up on your response. That in your last response you said this. How far is this? So this has made me to be quite hands-on in terms of following through the improvements with the different departments. So in terms of the Wellises Bridge, we presented the findings to all the 5 stakeholders, and we highlighted the governance gaps and everything. And we will be, they've also invited us. They are now resuscitating their governance structures, and they've also asked us, DPME, to come in and monitor that they get to sit according to the way they've planned. So they've also requested that we do a benchmarking with countries like Japan, and it's underway. So DPME is also putting together a platform for sharing of good practice, and it brings in all the stakeholders in the 6 provinces every quarter to come together and share good practice, because it is one of the gaps that we picked, because government has invested so much in this program, but it has a lot of problems. So we are grateful that all these departments that we are working with, they really see the value that DPME brings and the value for evidence-based policy making. Chair, I want to thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was excellent and fascinating overview of how rapid evaluations are being institutionalized within the South African system, and how they are being used to respond to urgent implementation challenges while still maintaining methodological rigor. Really appreciate the 2 examples of the early weather warning systems and the Willie Sizwe rural bridge program. And yeah, I think it's very interesting that rapid evaluation can accelerate public sector projects, but its value also lies in identifying where things need to change or slow to ensure public safety. And in the case of the bridge, like structural integrity. And I think it's also important the factor of considering things like indigenous knowledge and the trust of certain communities. So thank you very much for that. So our second speaker is Roland Tarimwa from the Office of the Prime Minister of Uganda. I think, Sarah, are you still sharing? Is someone still sharing? I'm seeing double.
Sarah, you just need to stop sharing, please. There we
Ah,
go.
all right. Okay. So our second speaker is Roland Taremwa from the Office of the Prime Minister of Uganda. Roland is a monitoring and evaluation specialist within the Directorate of Monitoring, Evaluation and Inspection, and currently coordinates Uganda's government evaluation facility, which supports the strengthening of national evaluation systems and the promotion of evidence-informed policy making across government. He has more than 8 years of experience in research, monitoring and evaluation, systems design, and policy development, with a particular focus on development, effectiveness, evaluation, and public sector performance. Roland holds a master's degree in monitoring and evaluation, a postgraduate diploma in monitoring and evaluation as well, and a Bachelor of Science in Maths and Computer Science. He is a registered evaluation practitioner with the Uganda Evaluation Association and serves on several national monitoring and evaluation structures, including Uganda's National M&E Technical Working Group and Evaluation Subcommittee. Through his work, Roland has contributed to a range of evaluations and initiatives aimed at strengthening the use of evidence in policy formulation, implementation, and review. So we are very pleased to have him with us today to share Uganda's experience with rapid evaluations. Roland, thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. That's a fair request that you give me rights to share. Great, thank you. Okay, I hope we can see the screen.
Yes, thank you.
All right, let me start by thanking Twende Mbele for putting this together and everybody who has logged in. I will be talking about rapid evaluations and how we do them as Government of Uganda, looking at some of the evaluations we've done in collaboration with Twende Mbele in the past. And we do have a national public sector M&E policy as Uganda, first approved by Cabinet in 2013, and with support from a number of entities, including Clear AA and Twende Mbele. We have revised it recently in 2025. And this is the guiding document and framework that actually we sought to do these rapid evaluations under. And the main aim of the policy is to improve and strengthen coordination of cost-effective production of evidence across government and its partners, but also to promote the use of this evidence that is generated on implementation and results of national strategies, programs, and policies. Under that policy, we as Uganda, government of Uganda, look to do 5 things. Firstly, to embed M&E management practices, because there's still a growing culture of M&E in organizations, but embedding M&E in every management practice remains an area with significant gaps. We also do conduct a number of evaluations as Uganda, mostly in the development partner world, but also as government. But we feel like the scope is still limited or inadequate, so the policy seeks to increase the coverage, but also to make sure that the evaluations are as rigorous as possible in terms of methodological rigor, depth, scope, participation, and the likes. We also have a lot of players in the ecosystem of evaluation, monitoring, research, and learning. So the policy seeks to clarify the roles of major institutions and players within that space. We also have a problem of coordinating demand to ensure that whatever evaluation goes out there is at least demand-driven, or if not demand-driven, then create demand for the evaluation products. And lastly, the policy seeks to continuously scale up capacities in M&E at both central and local government. So under this policy, there are a lot of assessments that we do conduct. And from what we call the local government performance assessment conducted since 2016, financial year 2016-17, which ideally is a cornerstone of our intergovernmental fiscal transfer reforms that we continue to undertake to improve and strengthen accountability and transparency in the public sector. We had done 4 cycles of scoring since 2016-17, and we identified persistent bottlenecks as we got into our NDP3 and launched it. And it's from some of the bottlenecks identified within the local government performance assessment that we engaged and collaborated with Twende Mbele in 2021 to pilot rapid evaluations, because we realized that the cost and time taken for the rigorous evaluations we are conducting were not meeting the time demands or timely evidence needs of government for us to make timely decisions. And we did produce the evaluation reports by May 2022, had them peer reviewed in the National Emergency Technical Working Group, and even presented a cabinet paper. And all this was done within 9 months of commissioning. To undertake those evaluations, we followed Uganda's national evaluation standards. We have a set of standards that have 5 different dimensions on utility to make sure that every evaluation, whether an impact evaluation, a process evaluation, implementation evaluation, or even a rapid evaluation, is useful by the time you conclude it, and it actually meets the information needs of users and is owned by all the stakeholders. We also looked at the feasibility of the rapid evaluations we are conducting, make sure they are participatory and realistic, the quality and precision, and we shall be looking at what we followed to ensure this. Ensured we had ethical conduct the way we undertook the evaluation, and also ensured that we built capacity both within government and outside in the academia that we partnered with to undertake rapid evaluations. So in our partnership with Twende Mbele, we got together a number of stakeholders across the evaluation space from different institutions, both government institutions and non-government institutions, those are development partners and NGOs. And we got into a right shop. And after 3 days of discussion and mapping and brainstorming, we came up with a number of areas where we thought we can conduct rapid evaluations. And 2 of those are what I've covered in this brief. And in that right shop, we identified 4 areas. One of them, again, triangulating with the results from the local government assessments, was the issue of human resources, where so many critical positions were always vacant year in, year out. And that's what was stopping a lot of service delivery. We also looked at the issue of the 20% gate collection and revenue sharing for the money that's generated from gate collections at game parks. And there's a section of the Uganda Wildlife Authority Act, section 64, subsection 4, that defines the economic and social benefits that must be derived from this revenue collection and channeled to the local communities. So we thought it would be important to identify some of those gains that have come from that policy position and to see if it's worth it or if there are any areas that we need to revise. In that right shop, we also looked at the parish development model, which is Uganda's flagship project or program for delivering grassroots economic transformation. And that is still ongoing. But at the time when we sat to do the rapid evaluations, the president had just launched this program. So we thought we would look at the readiness of the communities, readiness of the structures, readiness of government to implement this, and whether everything we needed to commence the program was in place. And the last one was looking at local revenue, because local governments collect, those are districts and town councils and municipalities and cities collect revenue and they have targets for on-source revenue. But from our local government assessments, we realized that they were only meeting 42 to 47% of their local revenue targets. Sorry, 42 to 47% was the average score on attainment of local revenue targets. So we thought we would identify some of the areas that are prohibiting meeting of these targets, diagnose the bottlenecks, and come up with corrective strategies. We picked 2 of these 4 areas, and the first one that we picked was the one on HR management. And there was an evidence gap that actually prompted that study. When we looked at the local government assessment, in 2016-17, the assessment showed that the average score across local governments was 45%. And in 2017-18, it was 51%. However, staffing gaps continue to exist. So we're wondering if since the government standard is 75%, why are we moving so slowly towards that 75%? What is causing these gaps and how can we address it? The other areas that had shown you revenue mobilization had increased from reduced from 47% to 42%. And we were thinking, what is wrong? How can we address it? So we looked at a number of areas, but picked out that HR management because of the slow growth in terms of improving staffing levels. The other area was on the 20% gate collection. We realized that the Act mandates that 20% of the share of park fees goes to the communities. And in a period of 2 years, we disbursed 16.797 billion to all the districts that host borders of these game parks, which is about $4.8 million, which was significant money. So we wanted to ask a question as to whether the aspirations of the Wildlife Act were actually being met. And we realized that, yes, there's an increase in how much we're putting into these communities that border the game parks in terms of the percentage of the gate collection, but we had no evidence that showed that some of the intended results of this subsection of the Act were happening. For example, fostering community development, compensation for human wildlife conflicts, improved relations between park management and communities. We knew these were the principles supposed to be followed and the results supposed to be delivered. We're increasing the amount of spending on investment into these communities, but we had not documented the results. So we conducted 2 rapid evaluations concurrently. The first one on local government staffing, whose main objective was to examine why critical positions remained unfilled. And from that, we had 3 main areas we're looking at. 1, examining the staffing in the local government selected under our scope against approved structures within the Ministry of Public Service staffing norms and established ceilings. We're also looking to identify recruitment challenges, whether they were structural, technical, political, social, cultural, or financial. And we also sought to identify strategies to improve recruitment, looking at what government can do in the short and medium term, but focusing on what can be done within the current fiscal envelope, because we know the continued and recurrent challenge of the shrinking fiscal space. So we thought we would identify those strategies that can be implemented without necessarily having to bring in or attract new money. And these would be things around workload management, recruitment enhancements, coping mechanisms, and the like. The second study on the 20% gate collection had the main objective of assessing whether the revenue model was improving the lives of the host communities, but looking at 4 specific areas. 1, on the effectiveness, efficiency, relevance, and sustainability of the conditional grant, how it was being disbursed, and what the provisions within the Wildlife Act said, and whether we were following the processes and procedures prescribed within the Act and its attendant regulations. The second area was to look at improvement in community livelihoods, trying to see what improvements have been realized, what gains have been made for those communities, if there are any assets that have been established, etc. We also looked to identify lessons both the intended and unintended lessons so that this can inform future revenue sharing modalities. We also looked at the sustainability measures for us to be able to identify what can be done within the regulations or amended within the regulations to ensure that the gains from these investments from the 20% gate collections can be maintained. As you recall, one of the 5 tenets in our evaluation, Uganda evaluation standards, was utility. So our rapid evaluations were utilization focused, and they were designed for decision makers that can act, because we have a lot of decision makers, but without who takes action, whose decision matters the most when it comes to these two thematic areas that we're evaluating. And for that, initially from the design, we planned for both vertical and horizontal dissemination across the entire policy frontline chain, looking at horizontally across ministries, for example, the different ministries that act on these two thematic areas, horizontally across the different local governments that, for example, host game parks, but also vertically between the ministry and the local government that the grant goes to, and the lower local government under that local government. So we took all that, looking at the structure right from cabinet all the way to community level monitoring structures. So at a policy and oversight level, we had 4 main institutions and structures that we looked at. That was the Parliament of Uganda, which is in charge of oversight and appropriations, and cabinet that gives us strategic policy alignment with the National Development Plan priorities. Also the Prime Minister that coordinates programs and ensures it tracks the results from these programs, and the Ministry of Finance, through which the fiscal envelope is determined, dispensed, and wage harmonization decisions can be made. We also looked at the level of the National Development Plan programs or sector leads, because we had something on wage. We had the Ministry of Local Government, which is in charge of the local governments implementing, but also the Ministry of Public Service, because of the local government structure, the District Service Commission frameworks, and things like a hard-to-reach policy that affects staffing levels. We also looked at the Ministry of Trade, Wildlife and Antiquities, which is in charge of the Wildlife Act that we're assessing on the 20% gate collection, but also looking at their strategy as tourism and wildlife, and the program implementation, action plan, targets and results within our development plan. But also a direct institution that oversees these game parks, the Uganda Wildlife Authority, and it's the one that actually disburses these funds to the local governments, collects the funds and then disburses the 20% to these local governments. So we also looked at them at that level. Then in terms of the local government structures, we looked at the district local governments, which recruit, deploy, ensure service delivery, and also inspect and monitor service delivery in the local governments where these two thematic areas were actually being executed. But for the sake of the staffing level study, we looked at the District Service Commission, which is the one that is in charge of recruitment. The local governments fill the vacancies. And then for the 20% gate collection, we looked at 3 structures. One, the community procurement management committees, which do oversight, identification, and management of the projects that this revenue shared revenue funds. The community procurement committees that do the purchasing and financial administration within the communities, but also the host communities that are expected to monitor execution of these projects and actually do ownership and sustenance of the investments or assets that are established. In terms of methodology, we adopted a mixed method that one designed for speed. So we looked at balancing expediency in terms of speed, but also the rigor and the cost of the evaluation, because we don't have a lot of resources. And we were focusing on these evaluations being completed within a 45 to 60-day rapid window, and so that we could meet the timeline of the start of the next budgeting cycle at the time. We also combined secondary data review with primary fieldwork. So we had teams comprising of officers from different ministries that were identified as stakeholders in these 2 fields, led by also the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance and the National Planning Authority. And then we looked at 4 evaluation criteria. We also adopted a stratified purposive sampling, identify specific areas, specific individuals, specific local government that we shall go to, but we combined this with the convergent parallel mixed methods to be able to get both quantitative and qualitative data. Our desk review across the studies looked at local government performance assessment scores, the integrated personnel and payroll management system records that give you vacancy rates, what positions have been filled, staff population ratios, and the disbursements of the revenues from game parks in accordance with the Act. The primary field work had both key informant interviews and focus group discussions, and we shall look at what we covered in that. And then we triangulated with payroll data and establishment lists within the local governments, staffing norms against actual deployment within schools, within health facilities and the likes. And then the Uganda Wildlife Authority annual performance reports, and also the Auditor General report, which gave us some of the revenue sharing information and some of the figures on disbursements and utilization. And then by the end, we came up with a decision brief from a final report to dissemination to Parliament, to a cabinet memorandum, and also a policy brief. All these were combined into one decision brief to cabinet. In terms of key informant interviews, we had 63 that covered chief administrative officers, HR personnel, district service commissions, and sub-county chiefs for the first study. And Uganda Wildlife Authority, Ministry of Tourism, district local governments, game wardens, and community procurement committee members for the second study. And for the focus group discussions, the study on staffing looked at local council, LC councillors, because they're the ones that form part of the District Service Commission. And the second one focused on, and school management committees, and then the local communities. And then the second study focused on the CPMCs, the Community Procurement Management Committees, which do the oversight of the projects. Our evaluation criteria did not pick up some of the other criteria from the DAC plus, the coherence and the impact, because of the amount of time we had, the resources, and the scope and other dimensions that we thought would scale down. So we focused on only 4 areas: effectiveness, efficiency, relevance, and sustainability. And we gave ourselves 60 days from mobilization of the resources and personnel to undertake this study to reporting to cabinet. And there were a number of trade-offs we had to make to have that happen. In terms of scope, both geographical and time scope, for the first study in local government staffing, we covered 27 of 146 districts across the country and 2 of the 19 municipalities. But we covered 4 regions, and when I say 4+, we also had, we identified refugee hosting districts, because there's an element of refugee hosting that actually impacts, one, the projects that come from revenue sharing and how much is generated from game parks, but also they put a strain on public services. So in districts where you're looking at local government staffing, refugee hosting districts usually have a greater need for staffing levels because the population is a lot larger and more complex to manage. But we stratified this across the 3 levels: the regions, the type, looking at a good mix of rural districts and the urban councils, but also looking at the capacity levels for the staffing, mixing local governments that have high staffing levels with those with low staffing levels, and also those that are in the high performance band within the local government assessment with those that are in the low performance band. For the second study on 20% gate collections, we covered all the 9 national parks across the country, looking at 14 districts that border these parks, and looking at 9 wardens that are in charge of these parks, the 9 parks, but also 30 different indigenous communities that surround these parks. And those are the parks there: Bwindi, Queen Elizabeth, Mugahiga, Maction Falls, Chibale, Lake Mburo, Kidepo, Rwenzori, and Semliki. So what are the key findings from our studies? I'll start with the very first study. We realized that critical seats, when critical seats are empty, the consequences are in the actual classroom. So when you measure in the local government assessment, when you measure the actual results, things like PLE and USE passing rates and numeracy levels and literacy levels, you find a close correlation between those local governments that were scoring highly on these dimensions and the higher pupil-teacher ratio in those local governments. When you look at the graph down there, we found that the three districts of Noya, Kabong, and Karenga that were performing poorly in terms of the education outcomes, again, are the ones that had teacher-pupil ratios of 1 to 150 and above. Also, we realized that the general overall performance of the local governments that had a higher staffing level, general, not focusing on critical cadres, those same local governments are the ones that also had the highest performance in the local government assessment. And between the lowest local government that we assessed in our scope and the highest local government, there was a very huge point gap, 44-point gap, the highest performing local government being Bara, 91%, and the lowest performing being Karenga at 47%, yet average score across the national average was 69%. And when we looked at the narrative and the qualitative information we collected, the main root causes that were identified by the respondents were: 1, political interference in the District Service Commission; 2, allegations of corruption in terms of allocating jobs and conducting the interviews, but also severe underfunding, mostly for the District Service Commissions, which were given about 2.5 million shillings on average, and they have a membership of 12 members, and they have to sit severally in a month. So if they get 2.5 million shillings in a whole quarter, you found that they would have maybe 1 or 2 sittings instead of having 6 or 7 sittings. So then they were unable to deliver on their mandate to be able to recruit on time. What were the key drivers identified during the rapid assessment? 3 key drivers. A structured driver was wage disparities, which were always pushing talent out, and the local government wages were seen to be lagging behind central government wages. And because of this, there was a lot of transfer of staff out of local governments and joining central governments or joining NGOs within a few months of their induction. There was also political interference in the decisions made by the District Service Commission, and this came from cultural and political pressures to say, we are waiting for that position because we want to fill it with one of our own. But you find that the person who comes from that same district, they have failed to identify somebody who has the same qualifications over a long time. So then they keep that position empty for a number of years until they have gotten one person who has graduated from that same community, for example. And this was distorting merit-based recruitment, especially for hard-to-reach areas. The third driver was financial, where a lot of wage was being returned to the treasury, especially in the education and health budgets. And as a policy for Uganda, at the end of the financial year, whatever money you have not spent is returned to the consolidated fund, and that is now utilized in the next budgeting cycle. So you basically lose that money. And a lot of money was being lost, and yet this is money that's provided at the start of the financial year. So this was paradoxical for us to say you have a lot of vacancies, you have received wage, but by the end of the financial year, you're returning majority of the wage back to the consolidated fund. But we also identified some systemic issues around when some of the wage is released, where some of the local governments said, Minister of Finance will release for us wage for recruitment in the 4th quarter. But there are certain procedures and statutory requirements and timelines that we have to meet for us to be able to recruit. So that's the reason why we returned the wage. For the second study, of course, from the findings, we found that 6 out of the 10 deliverables and tangible outputs had been achieved in the different objectives. And in terms of disbursements, the disbursement has been scaled up by 3.9 times between the year 2018 and 2019. In terms of the source of funds, the money that is collected, that 20% comes from guerrilla permits that are sold. And in that period, over $800 is collected for each permit. So you can imagine 20% of $800 on every guest that goes into doing the impenetrable forest, for example, goes towards the host community. So this is a lot of money, and we documented a lot of infrastructure outputs delivered and livelihood outputs. As you can see, across all the 9 parks and host communities, 163 kilometers of access roads have been constructed using these funds. 103 classrooms, 27 boreholes, 461 water tanks, 32 VIP latrines, and 122,000 trees planted. In terms of infrastructure assets. In terms of livelihoods, 4,243 goats have been procured and distributed amongst beneficiary households. 1,992 beehives also distributed. 7,000 fish fries provided. 1,106 birds, poultry birds provided. 305 pigs and 125 heifers and ox plows. So you can see there's a lot of assets and livelihood inputs that have been procured and provided to those host communities. And what were the key drivers for the results we're seeing? They were across the 4 dimensions: political, social, economic, and financial. And on the political side, projects, these communities and beneficiaries and the implementers all on average rated the projects 6 out of 10 overall, showing that there was still a lot of leadership support that was required for us to cover that 4-point gap for us to have perfection in these projects. The scheme covered all 9 national parks, but this requires a lot of sustained coordination, and this was a very big challenge, especially district political and technical leaders coordinating. In Semliki, one of the game parks that we went to, only 2 of the 17 projects that had been funded in the financial year, one of the 2 financial years, remained functional. This is just the 2nd year of implementation, and they were already not functional. So we saw a sustainability challenge there. On the social side, there were so many social assets that have been created: roads, classroom, boreholes, VIP latrines, etc. But in some of the water-stressed areas, the communities told us how these had actually greatly improved community access to safe water. And for Kisoro, they reported a 40% reduction in human-wildlife conflict because of some of the assets and fencing and etc. that had been provided to the communities, even providing alternative livelihoods so that they didn't have to go into the parks, putting up stone wall enclosures around the parks, repairing them, etc. On the economic drivers of these results, there was a lot of livelihood support that I mentioned in the previous slide, and the communities said livelihood support was the most impactful interventions across all the interventions. And they were also very appreciative of the productive assets that were created, which were documented. And it showed that these investments had strong gains within the communities, but mostly those that prioritize income-generating projects rather than infrastructure projects. On the financial side, the disbursements by the Uganda Wildlife Authority to these communities between 2018 and 2019 increased, as I told you, by 3.9 times, from 3.4 billion to 13.4 billion. And the communities received 25% gate fees, but also along the way, some of the project sums went towards M&E because of lessons learned, while the districts also and the sub-counties received a portion of that 20%. And we saw a lot of district project transfers that took about 14 days as opposed to the 45 to 60 days they used to take before in terms of upstream remittances. So those are the findings from the 2 studies, but what have we learned as government of Uganda? 6 lessons documented. 1, staffing is a precondition. It's not a consequence of service delivery. If you have wages that have been unspent being returned to the treasury, at the end of the day, if you've invested in infrastructure, set up classrooms and the like, but you return the wage, then the results are not going to be realized from those assets. So staffing remains a precondition, and you have to plan for it even before you plan for the assets. Secondly, involving communities right from identification stage is equivalent to ownership. It's the only way you can realize ownership. And from the communities that we spoke to, all the assets that we found functional, those where the communities were actually involved in identification of which project was going to be implemented for them. Then harmonizing wages is a great lever that can retain talent. For most of the local governments where we found that they had found ways either through projects or development partner or NGO support to harmonize and top up some of the wages for their staff, we found that the results were high, the retention were high, But those that did not have any of these plans had both, they were bleeding out on trained staff, had a lot of attrition, and there was a lot of demotivation, which negatively impacted staff productivity. We also realized that the enterprise of choice for the other projects that are designed out of the 20% gap collection, if the choice is tagged to the community within which the enterprise is being implemented and not dictated from the center of the district, but is tagged to the most common livelihood need within the local community, then there's a lot of economic returns to that same community. Where we had goats and beehives that were the most common enterprise, the groups that chose those same enterprises, we found that they started setting up infrastructure around them. They started investing in, for example, processing honey and packaging it and selling it. But where we had fish fries that were given to communities where one or two people had expressed interest, the communities had been convinced to do fish farms, for example, we found that they were stressed, and later on they didn't have, they were water stressed, but they had not planned for things like drip irrigation and valley dams. And in the end, the projects were suffocated and failed. We also realized that strict monitoring can prevent asset stripping. Where you have beneficiaries that are poor, because these are the most the beneficiaries that are usually targeted by this project. If you don't monitor them and supervise them and have, for example, the district natural resource office and the community development officer going there every month, and at least the district extension officer going there every week, that household is more inclined to sell off the asset that you have given them or that they have acquired. And even the communities will rent out something as offices, yet it was initially designed as, for example, a classroom block. And we found a lot of that, and I'll be showing you some of the pictures. We also realized that rapid evaluation works. However, you have to scope it tightly, give it a very short timeline, but also ensure that it's utilization focused. And ours was 45 to 60 days, and we found that because of this, and Parliament and Cabinet knew that this study was being completed very quickly, and if they sat and discussed it, then they could make decisions on the next budgeting cycle. Then they were very interested and actually kept demanding for their report, and we had produced it quickly. We also found a lot of best practices. For example, Mbarara City, that had a 90% staffing level, had also some other complementary practices that ensured that that delivered on this staffing level. For example, they are disciplined district service commission scheduling, follow-up, phone calls, emails, and different ways that they would call upon all these local councillors to sit down and discuss recruitment processes and also conduct interviews. And they were transparent about their shortlists. Once there's a shortlist, they would immediately pin it up, reach out through text messages, etc., to all the people. Even those who have failed to, who have not made it to the shortlist would be informed, which is usually not the case. Usually, districts only inform those who have made it to the shortlist. We also realized that they had consistent budget releases to the District Service Commission, so there was always funds for allowances for the commission to sit and make the decisions on staffing and recruitments. So what are policy recommendations? One, I divided them across the two studies. So the first 4 recommendations regarding the local government staffing. One, harmonize wages, and most of these have actually been taken up since. Harmonize wages across government agencies, both between local governments and central governments. And we have seen a number of policies come in for Uganda since the time we did rapid evaluations. We've had the wages of science cadres revised this financial year that is starting next month. They've also enhanced the salaries of arts workers in certain areas, for example, teachers. So we've seen certain reforms come in place ever since we actually did these evaluations. We had recommended that they replace the district service commission with regional service commission because we thought, one, this would minimize localized political and cultural interference, but also there would be a saving on the amount of money that goes into district service commission funding. However, this has not yet been delivered, but we've seen a lot of reviews around centrally recruited cadres, for example, teachers that were recruited, secondary teachers that were recruited by the Ministry of Education, before and then deployed by the local governments. We have seen ongoing reviews on this policy. The third was to operationalize the hard-to-reach policy, including implementing housing, lunch, and transport incentives for those hard-to-reach districts, and we have seen this now implemented ever since then. And also the fourth was on refocusing local government structures on career growth, and we have seen a lot of revisions to the way public local government undertakes its performance improvement plans, continuous professional development of some of these cadres like teachers and the health workers. And we've seen, we had also proposed that they extend the induction periods for the district service commissions, because some of these people are just, they're local councillors, they're not very, some of them are not very educated. So when you only induct them for 2 days, then you don't have any responsibilities, but we have seen a change in this from 2 days to 5 days ever since we did the rapid assessment. On the 20% revenue sharing model, our recommendation that one, we simplify the pipeline through which this 20% revenue passes up to when the projects are delivered, but we also lock in some transparency across the different areas. So we had 4 recommendations for this. One, instead of Uganda Wildlife Authority remitting the funds through the districts, then the approval process in the districts, which takes about 45 to 60 days, as I'll show you in the pictures of the documentation we found. We said remit the funds direct from the Uganda Wildlife Authority to the community procurement management committees, because these are structured, they are registered by the district, they have bank accounts, etc. So send the money direct so that you cut out that 60-day period. Secondly, we thought we should centralize procurement because we realized that there were capacity gaps within the community procurement committees. So there was a lot of disparities in terms of the standards of the inputs that were procured. For example, the animals, the beehives and the likes that were procured for these communities. And there were disparities in unit costs across the 9 parks as we documented. The other recommendation was to publish get revenues per park monthly, because they would only publish them annually. So by that time, the community would not even be able to track how much had been collected, how much is supposed to come to them. And we thought it's important that every month, when they collect money, since this money is actually taken through an electronic system, then they publish how much has been collected by the park, so that the community itself can also monitor how much has come in, and they can even start planning for what projects they can do even before the money comes. But we also thought it would also facilitate some of the community fora that's conducted by some of the local councillors, for them to say every month we shall sit down and discuss how much has come into this park that we border and how much we project we shall get and what we need to prioritize in the next cycle. And lastly, as a recommendation was strengthen community involvement at each planning stage, and also being flexible in the review of some of the enterprises. We found that sometimes a community has prioritized a certain enterprise, then from subsequent discussions, they want to revise them, and the district is adamant on what enterprise they prioritize at first. And you find that later on, the communities even lose interest in that enterprise. And we shall look at some of the projects that the community started on, made the discussions later and agreed to change the project, but they were forced to continue with the project, and along the way, the project was abandoned. As a conclusion, rapid evaluation works. Uganda has the receipts you have seen. So we only recommend 3 things. 1, speed from commissioning to the information reaching cabinet. Rapid evaluation should take at most 60 days. And they should, because they deliver decision-ready evidence, if it's inside the rapid window, it's short enough to fit into your next budgeting cycle. And also it's long enough for you to triangulate the findings of that evaluation with any other additional information you'd need to come up with concrete findings. Second is precision. You should pinpoint bottlenecks within your rapid evaluation. Don't look at the symptoms. So the way you design your evaluation question is very important. The evidence gaps that you focus on that inform which thematic area you should assess should be looking at bottlenecks and not the symptoms of a problem being seen. For example, for us, we're looking at the local government score in the human resource area, and we said, this shows there's a problem. Let's do a rapid evaluation to identify the problem. And because of that, we identified most of those problems that I presented on wage gaps, hard-to-reach incentives, etc. And thirdly, replicability. The method that you choose that we chose, we think can be replicated across different countries. The way we approach the mixed methods, the kind of evidence that we looked at, the different systems, both automated and manual reporting systems. The 4 criteria out of the DAC plus criteria, or the revised DAC that we chose, we think gives you enough rigor to be able to have concrete findings that can be acted on. The tight 60-day period is something we would recommend, and the 3-tier dissemination that I talked about is also something that we would recommend. And we think that this playbook can be exported to other countries. And at the end of the day, embedding rapid evaluation as a standing capability, not a one-off, should always be a priority for us, because we mixed the local government, the staff within the different ministries with OPM staff. And then within each team, we mixed a consultant from academia, who was from Makerere University. So we had a consultant, researcher, an officer from OPM who is in M&E, and an officer from the line ministry, comprising of 1 team and also an intern. So a 4-man team, but looking at building capacity of interns to build evaluation capacities, building in-house capacities, both within the Prime Minister and also ministries, and also gaining from the experience in research from academia and the consultants. We think this is a model that can be enshrined in annual work plans and a sustainable model for Uganda. So just a few pictures there. That is a lady, a beneficiary in Kamwenge somewhere. She, from the livelihood project, she got 1 goat. By the time we went there, she had 3 goats out of it. This is an apiary project where that group was given 5 beehives, but by the end, they had close to 80 beehives within the game park, so which was helping them be able to generate revenue from the game park, but also benefit from the 20% gate collection. The lower picture was a focus group discussion. That's a sub-county chief somewhere in Kasese, who is part of the community procurement management committee. And it was explained to us the process that they go through for them to procure, from when they initiate the design of the project to how they procure the items, to how they pay for them, to how they ensure accountability and reporting. And the other lower picture on the right, that is a staff house that had been built through the 20% gate collection that was remitted to that community. And that's a group of the CPNC and the CPC, the committees that oversaw the procurement design of that project and the delivery of the project. And here you can see the top is a foundation of a building, which was a girls' hostel. The community started it. And then later on, they wanted to change from a girls' dormitory to now make those classroom blocks, and the district refused. And the community opted to stop constructing the project. And by the time we went there, it was ready to continue, but it was stuck there. Yet it was very, very good work that had been done. And the lower one was actually now abandoned, because for them, they had started as a classroom block. But eventually they said, we already have classroom blocks. Now they did the alternative. They wanted dormitories, but they were told, no. You said you will design the classroom block with a library. You can't change this. So we thought some of these rigidities within the rules of the regulations for the Act would be changed. Those others are procurement documents up there that we got from the districts. And the other one is a statement from the bank that was showing us the timelines from when the money comes from the Uganda Wildlife Authority. That's a statement on the left-hand side to the requisition by the district natural resource officer to the chief administrative officer, saying these are the different local community groups. These are the project codes we have given them, and this is the amount that they've requested, and it is signed off and ticked. And down you can see Katweka Watogoro Town Council had received 100 million shillings to undertake their project, and they had actually provided a receipt to the district to show accountability processes. So I want to stop the presentation there and return the chair to you, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Roland. That was an excellent and highly practical presentation. We love also photographic evidence. It really paints the picture so well. The Uganda experience obviously illustrates particularly well how rapid evaluations can move beyond simply identifying problems to generating actionable evidence within decision-making timelines. And I mean, just from one example of how frustrating and sometimes ironic, some of the bottlenecks that you mentioned were that prevented, for example, the hiring process in local governments, and how unfortunate it is that in some instances you'd even have to return funds to the treasury. But in the interest of time, I think we're going to move straight to the questions. I will keep you there, Roland, so you can ask the first one. Let me see, because there's some on the chat and there's some in the Q&A. So let me start with the one on the chat. So this one, Roland, if you can address it, given the success of these rapid evaluations, and what are the biggest institutional or capacity challenges to embedding rapid evaluation as a routine decision support tool across national, provincial, and local government?
Hi, Amanda. That was for Sarah. Sorry, I didn't mention.
Oh, sorry. Sarah, you've had a little break. Maybe you can take over while.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think for one thing, in as much as we push for agents of results, there are things that we cannot trade off, like rigor in evaluations, and it can be done only with a skilled workforce. It's a non-negotiable, because rapid is about speed, but we need to make sure that there's rigor in evaluation. So, like the examples that I've provided, the way the national evaluation system was introduced in South Africa, it was such that there was too much outsourcing, like using external service providers. But I think now we are also pushed by fiscal constraints to make sure that we begin to get our hands dirty in terms of doing the evaluations themselves. And one thing that, if you check the National Evaluation Policy Framework, is actually pushing for evaluative thinking as a skill, as a competence that that should not be limited only to the M&E professions. When we institutionalize evaluations, we also realized that there was this error that we made to think that the function on monitoring and evaluation only lies with the evaluation unit, the M&E unit within institutions. But now the National Evaluation Policy Framework is pushing for evaluative thinking as a competency that each and every program manager should have. So everyone who is doing a program, you should have that competence. So one thing in South Africa, we also make sure that when the National Evaluation Policy Framework is out, we establish as to how we can support its implementation. If we are calling for evaluative thinking as a skill, then there are capacity development initiatives that could have been set to support the implementation of the national policy framework. And one thing that COVID has done is that there are so many webinars out there, for free, where we just stepped out of the GLocal week, where we thought we knew about AI, and we got out with so much information. So we have to admit that we are in a fiscal constrained environment, and we cannot have excuses to say we don't have a budget, so I cannot be capacitated. It's incumbent upon us to take up opportunities out there in terms of what is this evaluative thinking, what is this approach that the National Evaluation Policy Framework is pushing, so that we get to make sure that we have the capacity So even when the national evaluation system was introduced in South Africa, we started with national and the provincial. So that's that you discover that those levels are quite ahead. So there's also no harm at local level when you're doing an evaluation to invite some of those people who have the skills to be part of your steering committee to also guide you as to, and also utilize ahead in Uganda, you also utilize your universities in terms of making sure that you have got the right skills to conduct that evaluation, because issues of rigor are non-negotiable, even if it's a rapid evaluation. In a nutshell, I tried to answer some questions as I saw them, but this one I had not answered. I tried to type. There were a number of questions that I attended to. Thanks, Amanda.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah, for that answer. And yes, you have been answering a lot of them. And if we won't be able to get through all of them, we will share your answers along with presentations. So there's Uganda's question then for yourself, Roland. You suggest that Uganda's rapid evaluation model could be replicated in other countries. What institutional capacities, political conditions, or leadership commitments do you believe were most critical in its success? And what challenges might other governments face when trying to adopt this approach? Not a lengthy one, but yes.
Yes, that's a very, very interesting question.
Yeah.
So we found that, first of all, making sure that these evaluation topics are demand driven is very important. And that demand has to come right from the top. So looking at, for example, cabinet decisions, cabinet discussions, looking at some of the questions that are asked on the floor of parliament, and using that as part of the basis upon which you select evaluation topics is very important. So that is one area where you can actually be able to ensure that you institutionalize that political demand. And I think for South Africa, you have sort of the same kind of government model. We also feel like when it comes to M&E and specifically evaluations, whenever we build capacity, we don't actually target the leaders. So as we were implementing our rapid evaluations, we did focus group discussions, but as I was showing you the targeted respondents for FGDs and for KIS, you realize that we had a lot of focus on the local government councillors, the local government leaders. So I feel like if you involve them at that point, even their recommendations within the study, once embedded, will ensure they can be implemented and replicated. And we thought by the time we actually came to parliament, these parliamentarians would go to these same councillors, and the councillors would give us exactly what they're already discussing with the parliamentarians. So when we made certain policy recommendations, by the time this was being presented to the parliamentary committee, the committee was already in agreement, and selling it to cabinets then became a piece of cake. We also think these evaluations have to already be embedded in some of the work plans and strategic plans that we have. And that is the level of leadership commitment on where the budget is going to go. So if rapid evaluations are already low cost, say maybe a rapid evaluation is going to cost us $20,000, I'm just giving an example, and you've embedded it in your work plan as a ministry, then already you have the leaders owning the budget, owning and signing off the work plans, and they feel like this now becomes part of their deliverables at the end of the work of the financial year. So a lot of times we undertake these rapid evaluations without necessarily having plans for them, and I feel like including them in the work plans and budgets and mainstreaming them into the work plans and budgets is very important. And the last thing that we face as Uganda and how we think this can be addressed is evaluation capacities at the subnational level and the local government level. Evaluation remains highly focused on central government capacities and core capacities. That's for us as Uganda. I know that for South Africa, you have a lot of efforts on building the capacities. I think you call it states or something, zone, is it states at state level? So for us, we have districts and many of them don't even have M&E officers. The M&E is conducted by a planner, etc. So it's a challenge we're faced, but we have learned from it. And now we actually deliberately go to every local government with a capacity building plan to try and build evaluative capacity so that even local governments themselves can conduct their own rapid evaluations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Roland. I'm just going to go on to the next question because it's a little bit related, and Sarah partially answered it in her presentation, but I'd like her to expand on it. It says that both evaluations involve frontline communities, bridges, users in SA, park host communities in Uganda. What is the single most effective method you have found to build trust and get honest feedback from communities when you only have a few days per site? Because it's rapid, isn't it?
Yes, Amanda. So I saw a question also that was talking. I think it can also try and answer this. Yes, you are right that we can be on site for one day and try and solicit information from communities really to try and establish. But you'll discover that the progress reports that the coordinating implementers are putting together, they will also tell you as to how communities feel about the project. I'm sure you know in South Africa, one of the things that has also contributed to the progress, to the slow progress of the project, is community protests. When communities are not happy in South Africa, they can just stop the project. They go and protest on that side. So these are some of the things that you would hear, especially having to have the community involved from the planning phase is quite important so that they feel being part of the community. Because remember, some of these bridges, you leave them there, and even the responsibility of care and avoiding issues of vandalism, it lies with the community. So when they begin to feel that this thing is theirs and they own it, they'll also take responsibility of their care to ensure that issues of vandalism do not happen. But what was quite interesting, in one of the, I also went on the ground. I went on the ground to monitor. There was one bridge really that was quite. We were also trying to get that really. I don't know if the stakeholders really did sufficient stakeholder engagement. I think we were doing focus group discussions with the key implementing institutions in the province, trying to really understand from a defense side, from the Department of Defense, Department of Transport, Department of Public Works, the municipalities, just to really establish how the construction unfolded, what were the challenges, we had to do that focus group for kind of 2 hours in that bridge, standing in the bridge. And strangely, not even a single car passed, only pedestrian. It's supposed to be a vehicular bridge. So we were even asking as to who determined that this bridge should be here, because not so far there was a parallel road that was quite busy. And we really wondered in terms of, was the decision made right to establish that bridge? Because you are talking about millions that have been spent in constructing that bridge. And here you are standing for 2 hours, not even any of a vehicle passes by. And then you wonder, were community consultations really sufficient? Are communities really happy? And and even as we're giving feedback, we really had to say, we really feel like probably that bridge was misplaced and community consultations were not done sufficiently, because 2 hours standing and no one passes by and anything. Yeah. So I hope I managed to answer, Amanda. Thank you.
Yes. No, it's definitely about ownership for the local communities to feel ownership and to heed their recommendations or their their feedback. Roland, what's the most effective method for building trust and getting honest feedback from communities?
Wow. If I
The
looked at
eternal qualitative issue.
yes, I think personally, I can think of say four things. One, uh, I don't want to call it approach or aura, but I can say the aura of the facilitator of that conversation. Because if I'm a good discussant, then the way I start a conversation with whoever it is that's taking me around to the asset, or if it's a key informant interview, the way I enter the office of the local government officer or the politician, and the first four sentences will determine how constructive their feedback will be and how honest it will be. And I would think just being honest about how the results are going to be used ensures that you manage those expectations. Because in some of the two studies that we conducted, when we went some of the communities, we realized that at one point, because we came, they thought it was some thought it was an audit, whereas others thought uh, uh, maybe if they gave us certain feedback in a certain way, then they would get additional funding. So bringing out the objective of that discussion, I think within the first 2-3 sentences is very critical. A bit of humor again lightens the mood around, but also makes sure they give you very easy feedback. Secondly, I would not advise that you communicate in advance to the communities, because some of the places where we found the most honest and constructive and critiquing feedback was in areas where, for example, we met a park officer or a warden, and he told us, okay, just go to this place, look for this person. And we drove to the community, looked for the person. They told us, he's right there. And then we told this person, we want to see what you've done. And then we just walked to the asset that they've established, whether they've been constructing. And that's how we found those pictures of some of the non-functional projects. Because then just walking through the communities and then finding whoever you find on site means that there's no premeditated feedback. There's no coaching of the feedback. They will give you exactly what it is and the exact evidence that is on ground. The third, I think, would be about the questions that we pose. I think they should be more open-ended than closed-ended, rather than say why has this facility failed? Why have you failed to finish the project? Maybe you say what happened with this project. Then it's then to tell you whether the facility has failed and why, and etc. And they give you that whole narrative. So I feel the way we structure our questions as well can determine whether the feedback is honest or not.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Roland. Back to you, Sarah. Question from Dalila. Any insight on the use of AI? I mean, it's a conversation we can't ignore, and not in monitoring and evaluation, and not in rapid evaluations. How do you see AI play a role in rapid evaluations?
No, thank you very much. I think the conversation on AI, I can actually share some of the inputs that I got from the GLocal week, because I also wasn't so much clued about issues of AI, but I really found it quite useful in terms of responsible AI. So I would say, remember, when we use AI, we should try and not substitute issues of participation. We should not compromise the human factor part of it because of use of AI, and we should try by all means to use it responsible. And there's this debate also that when we overuse AI, we kind of stifle the lived experiences. So there should be a balance. I know, especially in issues of rapid evaluations, you are also thinking about analysis that is quite quick, of which AI really tries to, it will assist us, especially in that. But we should also be quite careful in terms of how we utilize it, especially in terms of bringing out the lived experiences of people. One thing for sure is that AI is here, and we should use it, but use it, and we clearly have to identify the risks that come with it, and use it responsibly. I think in my little knowledge on AI, that's what I can say. Yeah, thanks.
No, thank you, Sarah. Roland, 1 minute answer, your thoughts on it before we close our session.
I think because of the limitation in terms of time and resources and etc. that that rapid evaluations address, AI would never have been more timely. It's very important. The element of triangulation, etc. However, we have to be careful with it because remember, a lot of these AI agents are trained on content that is online. A lot of our evidence we've collected, for example, as Africa, is not digitized. It's not online. Means these agents are training on information that is more suited to what is outside Africa than what is in Africa. So what's outside Uganda than what is in Uganda. So you have to be very careful. So important one, quote the source. Declare that you used AI for this specific section or this specific analysis. Quote the source. But even more importantly, what we're not doing is providing the prompt, because the detail in the prompt is what actually tells somebody how rigorous the result or analysis, the finding is that you've quoted. So quote the prompt, declare the source, the agent, but please use AI. It makes the work so much easier, and it's getting even more and more important each day in rapid evaluations.
Absolutely. Agreed. Dalila, I hope that answers your question. And it was just a thank you from Sakina to say thank you to Twende Mbele for organizing this timely and insightful session, and thank you to our presenters. So whether the objective is to save lives from severe weather systems in KwaZulu-Natal or Eastern Cape, or unraveling why there aren't critical bridges being built in some spaces, or diagnosing administrative chokeholds in classrooms in Uganda, or tracking billions of shillings in wildlife revenues, I think rapid evaluation is aggressively moving governments from an era of post-mortem accountability and merely documenting what went wrong years after the facts, and pulling them into an era of real-time adaptive governance. It really equips decision makers with the operational confidence, maybe to scale a project immediately or tighten failing regulations on the spot, based on the truths coming from the ground level feedback. So as we come to the end of our session today, I would like to thank our speakers, Sarah and Roland, for sharing their experiences and insights. Today's discussion has really shown that rapid evaluation is not simply about producing evidence more quickly. Rather, they're about generating credible, decision-focused evidence that can be used when governments need it most. So I would also like to thank all the participants for joining us today and for contributing your insightful and wonderful questions and reflections. And on behalf of Twende Mbele, thank you for being part of this learning exchange. And please remember that the recordings will be shared or available on our Twende Mbele YouTube channel and our website, and that we will share the presentation materials as well as the answers to the questions we didn't address, but that our panelists did respond to. But for the sake of everyone, sharing and knowledge sharing. We will be sharing those answers as well. And we look forward to seeing you at future Twende Mbele learning events. I wish you a wonderful afternoon and see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Nice being part of this.
Thank you.